Podcasters Roundtable, round 93, podcasting advice then versus now. So we're going to talk a little bit about what has changed over, I guess, the last decade, or pretty much since we've been around, which is, oh, you guys hear that? I got the
Yep.
live. The live is up. All right, we don't need to hear Ray double time. It's in my ears. So I think we have enough. It's just us today. I invited a lot of people, couldn't get a new roundtabler. This one was tough because you kind of had to have been around for a long time in podcasting. And then you also kind of need to be someone who gives advice, because we've been giving standard advice for a long time about starting a podcast, growing a podcast, you name it. Things have changed. We don't give the same advice that we used to give. So we're going to dig into some of those things that have changed. And yeah, we'll just see where it goes. We have a little bit of a list here, but welcome to the show. It's just co-hosts. We had 3 co-hosts essentially. Dave Jackson.
Yeah, Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com. This should be fun. We should title this Back in the Day, because that's kind of what we're doing.
Yep, it is back in the day. You can give us one good back in the day.
Back in the day. I was thinking about that today. I miss my iRiver.
You miss your iRiver. You don't have it on a shelf. Everyone's got like their podcast.
It's in a case someplace. Shoebox.
You gotta like put it on a little stand and then like spray paint it gold and put it on a little wood plate and just put it behind you. Make it into an award. We could start our own award show with the iRig as a golden iRig. Right. That would be cred. Daniel J. Lewis, welcome back.
Thank you very much. I'm from theaudacitytopodcast.com.
All right. Well, let's dig right into it. I mean, we all have shows about podcasting, including this one. And I think first thing on my list, this is always like, are we still talking about this? Feedburner, the big F. Like, okay, so here's the thing. Dave, back in the day, what was the advice with Feedburner?
Well, back then, we were all trying to figure out, iTunes had just come out, and we're like, oh man, Apple's making it hard. We've got to have these special codes in our feed. How are we going to get those codes in the feed? In pops Feedburner, and we're like, hallelujah, this is the best thing ever. You just throw your feed in there, and the beauty of it, of course, is if later you decide to change web hosts or anything, you just update your feed in Feedburner. This is the best thing since sliced bread. And oeuvre, we all jumped on our Feedburner feed, and we would obsess over our Feedburner stats then.
Yeah, and I mean, I loved having this sort of facade to work behind. This Feedburner was in between where you were hosting and something like iTunes or wherever directory is pulling your audio, and you could work behind Feedburner, change things up, and never affect anyone. I mean, we can move our feeds now and do that too, but it was nice. It was something that that made it kind of easy, especially back in the day when we all were probably tinkering and wrenching on our podcast quite a bit. Things changed. And, so Daniel, were you talking about Feedburner from the very first day that you're launching the Audacity podcast?
I think I was way back then. And that, well, I don't know. I think I still recommended Feedburner as a means to cache and protect your feed and make it easier to move, which in some ways, those two things, cache and make it easier to move, are the only 2 reasons I might still recommend it. But I can't remember the last time I actually recommended using SmartCast, which is the real crime of Feedburner and all of its other features.
Okay, so what's changed? So if we had set someone up with Feedburner before, they might have been using SmartCast. SmartCast gave you what? The iTunes tags?
Yeah, what SmartCast was created to do is turn a regular RSS feed into a podcast RSS feed. So SmartCast would give you that iTunes data. Not only has it not been updated in a while, like it still recommends that you make your cover art 600 by 600 inside of it. And we know now that's that's very old. It needs to be much bigger. There's some other things too. But the big problem with it is if you're feeding Feedburner a podcast-ready RSS feed from PowerPress or from Libsyn, and you use SmartCast, it can now create problems in your feed. It can mess up certain things, copy data over, and the Feedburner stats also completely inaccurate, as well as if you're using media download stats inside of Feedburner, that can mess up your downloads on certain platforms. So there's a lot inside of Feedburner that breaks stuff. It's not just bad advice. It does actually break things.
And then on top of that, on occasion, it just quits updating. So you'll have somebody go, that's weird. I've put out 3 episodes and none of them are in iTunes. Well, because Feedburner is between your feed, your actual feed, and iTunes, it just stalls. And you have to go in and go to the troubleshootize tab and click on, I think it's sync or something like that, sync now or something like that. And you're back up in business, but
I don't they actually call it like nuke? Didn't they used to call it like
yeah,
nuke
it was
your
some.
feed? They used to scare the heck out of you. Like, don't press this button.
Yeah. So other than that, it's perfect.
Paul's asking if he should, Paul Colligan's in the chat. He's asking if he should host on Odeo. I say yes, 100% host on Odeo. You know, back in the day when I first started, I went to Odeo and I was like, this is amazing. Well, we all know what Odeo is now, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. Still not making any money.
The big Twitter, yeah. They don't make, well, that's what they say. I don't know if I buy it, but yes, it's now Twitter. So Twitter was once a podcast host. What? Get back in the game there, Twitter. Go back to your roots. So yes, if you have access to Odeo, host there. It's crazy. All right. So what is the going advice? What has changed? What would you say? We know, Daniel, you don't completely dismiss Feedburner.
Right.
You mentioned that.
But in general, I'm not going to recommend that someone use it. It can be good in certain circumstances, at least for now, because of the caching. And especially if you're using some non-standard platform like Squarespace or SoundCloud or Blogger or WordPress.com or something like that, Feedburner might be necessary to add the podcasting information to your feed. Or if nothing else, it can make it much easier when you take your podcast seriously and you get your own website or move over to a better podcasting platform. But even then, if you're going to use Feedburner, I really recommend that you would use the My Brand feature, which lets you make it use your own URL so that even if Feedburner died overnight, literally disappeared, then you would still own the URL and not have to worry about what Feedburner does. You could just then get some expert to help you make sure that URL redirects to the proper place.
So what has changed is before we'd say use Feedburner, fill out these boxes, and there you go. You get yourself a podcast feed. Maybe some of us are. Sometimes we'd say that. Now we'd say, unless you really know what you're doing, probably try to go a better way. I would certainly say, for me, there's no use for it anymore. I'm going to go to something like Libsyn.
Yeah, I mean,
PowerPress on my own site.
Exactly. In both those, PowerPress, Libsyn, Spreaker, Podbean, most of the media hosts now give you a way to put in all those iTunes tags. And all the 4 that I just listed also make it pretty easy to move your feed. So for some reason you want to go from one host to another, they all have a way of saying, hey, my host isn't here anymore, it's over there. So the fact that you can redirect it and you have your iTunes tags, it's not really needed.
Remind Daniel to bring back up. Has the advice on how to move your feed, has that changed?
Yeah, it has.
How, Dave?
It used to be, it was weird because you have your original feed and then you have your new feed. We'll call it original and new. It used to be you could put a new tag, iTunes new tag in the original one. iTunes would come along, hit that, and then redirect to the new feed. And now what they're recommending is you put in a redirect, a 301 redirect, and in the new feed, you put the new feed tag, which seems kind of silly. The 301 actually takes care of most of that. I think the new tag doesn't
it make it faster though? The new tag will make things happen faster in iTunes. Maybe?
Yeah. And that's not exactly new. That's the way it really should have been all along. Because if you put the iTunes new feed URL tag in your original feed that you're redirecting, that tag will never be seen because it's being redirected before it can even be read. So it was always a better thing to put that on the resulting feed. Even if you have concerns that iTunes might be looking at the wrong feed, put that in your resulting feed and that will make sure everything works properly.
We have a dangerous one in the chat. John Moore says, the proxy RSS feed on Apple means you change your host without a hassle. Dangerous.
That's new advice. We're talking old advice. And that's new bad advice. But
Yeah, I mean, well, and so a lot of here's the thing: you get access to that when you now go submit your podcast. That has changed, but that's not really advice. It's kind of how you have to do it. Where you submit your podcast to Apple Podcast, that's also changed. You get access to this proxy RSS feed thing, option, whatever. But I say don't mess with that. I
Is he
mean,
talking the mirror,
yeah, probably.
the mirror feed or
I guess
whatever it
that's
is?
what I'm thinking. I don't even I'm not even that familiar with it because I just stayed away from it because it's I don't think that that's a good way to go. Now, I mean, it may be something they're building towards. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I just know it was a while ago, but I know for a while it had a spell for, I don't know, a day or two where it didn't work,
Yeah, I wouldn't.
even though it was an Apple product. And so to me, because I can move it in my whoever I'm using, my host, I kind of don't need it. So why muddy the water? And plus, I think that that would work for iTunes, but it wouldn't work for everybody else.
Unless you gave everyone else
The
that
iTunes,
RSS feed.
yeah.
in your
But
RSS
then aren't
form.
you kind of giving away control at that point to Apple? I mean, your RSS feed becomes this proxy feed that
Yeah.
I'm unfamiliar with it. It's not some, again,
That's
my
the
advice would
thing.
be don't touch it.
Yeah, that's the thing. Can you later decide, now that you've given everybody this Apple mirror feed, how do you redirect that? I don't know that you can.
Take control. This RSS feed thing is so important. And we could piggyback on that. Has that changed? Has it changed, in terms of creating an RSS feed, where you create that RSS feed? We're talking about control. Has that changed? I know in the beginning, I think I was using free hosts. We can talk about premium versus free. I think I was using Blip TV when I started an audio only podcast. That's not advice I would give. And when I had to not only move hosts, move feed, that became an issue. I was able to do it from the way I set it up, but it's not advice. Now I'm going to want more control than just a free service.
Yeah, archive.org was one of those things that I think to this day continues to be recommended as free hosting for your podcast.
Part of the problem is that some big podcasters use it, and I still like it as a put your podcast there as a backup option, right? I mean, archive.org, and put it there so it'll sort of live on past you if you want, or as a backup because it's free and in theory it's going to remain since they're trying to archive the web. But to host your show there, I think there's a moral question to it, or ethical question to doing that, which I think you shouldn't violate. But Daniel, what you're thinking that was a recommendation that people used to give quite often?
Yeah, it's for starting out, to do something free. I think if you're going to start out, there are other things to do, but the whole idea is if you're trying to do something for free, let it be for trying to just start, not run your podcast on a regular basis.
Cool. Paul, continuing with the humor, I think he's heckling us from the chat room. It's like, you can join us up here and do this in person, Paul. I know he has to go, but he says, what do you do if there are no more podcast names with the word fire in it? And he says too soon, but there is something there. Like, what did we used to say? Has any advice changed in terms of naming your show? I mean, a lot of shows used to start off with, or have the word podcast in it, right? And maybe one of the reasons you say that, or someone might give that advice, is because they can't get the podcasterstudio.com or podcastersroundtable.com. So they say, hey, just slap a podcast on there, podcastersroundtablepodcast.com. Now, in this case, it's a bad example because it sounds redundant and terrible,
and I think there's that aspect that many of us still feel like a podcast. I'm going to borrow Tom Webster's language here. He says that we shouldn't really be treating ourselves like podcasting is a special snowflake. We're creating shows, and it's not to say that what we create is not good. It's that we shouldn't treat it like it's its own silo, its own standalone thing. It's special and completely different from everything else in the entire world. We need to treat it as it's a show, yes, distributed via podcast. And for many of us, that's the only method of distribution. But now especially in the last couple of years, there have been so many more channels of distributing that same content than before.
Skeptic Smash Podcast. His best advice I was ever given was to never use pod in the name and never use a mic as a logo.
Yes, thank you. And don't put your podcast in the podcasting category in iTunes.
Yes, don't do that. Get out
Yeah,
of get off our
stop it.
lawn. Get off
Exactly.
our lawn. People wonder if you're hearing that and you're wondering what the heck's going on. There are categories you can put yourself in when you submit to iTunes or in your RSS feed, right? And one of these is podcasting. People just think I have a podcast, I'm in the podcasting category, but this is really a category for kind of our show, right? Podcasts about podcasting. I mean, what else fits in there? There's everything in there though, so it makes it really hard for any one of our shows to stand out because people, I mean, you're hurting yourself at that point. You don't want to be found for podcasting if you're a crocheting podcast,
Right.
But
High school history, something. Yes. It's like, no.
never fought that battle, but there's nothing to fight. I mean, it's just, it's, that is good advice though, to know how to properly categorize your podcast, because what's that affecting? I mean, what are we doing there when we're picking, on iTunes, you get 3. And I think at that top level is the most important one, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's really the one that matters most. But you don't only get 3. It depends on the tool that you're using, how many it gives you. PowerPress gives you 3. Feedburner gave you 5, I think. Libsyn, I think, lets you do 3 or so.
For iTunes or just in your feed?
For the iTunes categories, which also then work for Google Play Music as well. But it's really only that first category that matters most.
Is that because of the way different apps pull from the API, that maybe they don't pull the second and third category, they only pull the first?
I think it's more for a structure's sake. So if you're going to, like in iTunes, when you look at your podcast and you see at the top what category it's in, what category is going to display there? That's going to be the first one. And I've heard that Noteworthy, what's hot, maybe even ranking only really applies to the first category. Now, the ranking thing, I'm not so sure, but it's kind of difficult to test because you could rank really well in one category, but take that exact same position or weight to your podcast and put that in a different category, and you're up against completely different competition. So you may not rank the same. So it's very difficult, I think, to cross compare.
Right.
What could be helpful is look at, and maybe we should check this. Maybe I'll check this while we're talking. I will check this. Look at a very popular podcast that's in one category and then see what other categories they're in and see if they dominate that other category too. I'm going to do that right now.
Awesome. All right. I will move us to the next. We literally got the first thing on the list. In the pre-show, I'm like, do we have enough? And this always happens. It's like halfway through, we're 3 things down. That's good. That's a good problem to have. We'll have no problem. Actually, we did hit archive.org, so let me just strike through that one.
Well, something you mentioned, Ray, I think makes a good point. Back in the early days, it was a big thing and highly recommended to do a video podcast. Do you think that's changed now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't generally recommend a video podcast. In fact, a lot of times, if you want to do video, I would push towards a YouTube channel. I mean, but there's no reason you can't then put that in a podcast feed. However, video podcasting can be extremely expensive. It's difficult. So because audio has become synonymous with the word podcast, because people are freed from the screen at that point and can listen in more places, if your stuff doesn't absolutely need to be seen, I would say start with an audio show. Not only that, it's easier. Like, conquer the audio. Audio is hard enough to produce. It's hard enough to get right and to do well. I would say start with that. And if you find you have some time, extra time, maybe augment your audio show with short YouTube type clips. So yeah, in the beginning, I started with a video podcast, and I was probably I would say they were probably equal footing for me because video podcasts were pretty popular in the beginning, at least in my consumption habits. But I did feel like we had Tiki Bar TV, we had Dignation, Totally Ratchet. We had these bigger podcasts that were video, which Geek Beat. I mean, we had some big video podcasts in the space.
Audio Boom.
I don't go to iTunes. I'm a video guy, and I do not get my video shows from podcasts.
Yeah, I think like back then, thinking of it as well
More
for
free
myself.
hosting too, by the way.
Yeah, we didn't have YouTube back then.
No.
We didn't have Hulu and online streaming Netflix. So podcasts were really the only ways that we could get a show that we
Yeah.
could watch on demand without having to have recorded it off the TV.
Right. We also didn't have HD.
Oh my
Right.
gosh, no. I mean, remember and when we did, you'd have like video podcast download large, download small, download
Yes.
and I had to make a lot of those files.
Yeah.
It was terrible. I made files for like portable game stations and phones, 3GP files. Oh my God. Just no.
Okay, so there's a question. If you're going to do a video podcast, if there's a very good, legitimate reason to do video, should you still do multiple resolutions?
I do too. I would do one in HD, for lack of a better phrase, throw that on YouTube, put that on the website so that my visitors come there can see the cool, HD video. And then I would make a version smaller size for tablets/phones. That way the file's not going to be as big. It's not going to be as expensive and shouldn't take as long to download.
So you're saying the smaller version for the podcast?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have not tried this. I have not dug deep into it. It's something I recently discovered, probably because of this show. For every Podcasters Roundtable, the audio only version, when I create that, I download the 720p video file from YouTube, because this is recorded live to YouTube. And I scroll through and I look for a thumbnail. I watch way too many freeze frames of you guys and your faces, and I try to pick out something good for our guest. I don't know what we're gonna have for this one, but
you need to be the thumbnail.
Yeah, I was like the number one thumbnail, and then that's good enough. So the thumbnail I get from there, but I noticed that what is normally a huge file, I have my own YouTube channel and I upload 4K to it. If you download the MP4, even like the HD version, it's tiny. And this makes sense. YouTube has like magical unicorns compressing their video, and they have to because of the amount of video that goes up there. So I can download that file. It still looks pretty good, even though it's been compressed to all heck. So I had this thought that, hey, if I did a video podcast, I would upload my HD file to YouTube, kind of like what you're saying, Dave, but I would download it back down from YouTube after the unicorns do their work. And that's what I would put in my feed, because you can still get a really nice high resolution file at a relatively small file size. So don't
save the work. Yeah.
Someone's going to have to go and check on that, but it's an interesting hack that may work, because I'm not saying you can use YouTube to host. That's a very dangerous one. That has never been the case. But download it from your dashboard and compare the size and the quality. You might have a file size that you can fit into your hosting account. So something interesting to look into. Fun derail there. Anytime you talk about video, I'm going to get excited.
Well, and plus that might save you some time.
Yes.
Instead of having to re-rip it, just let it rip it and download it later.
Yeah. And even if you use Vimeo, Vimeo will do several of those transcodes for you. They'll do a large, small, medium. So there are sort of hacks for that. And the services tend to do it better than, compression back in the day used to be, it's such an art and a science. Compression is terrible. Fortunately, most video editors these days have presets for YouTube and Vimeo, and they work really well. So I still do this every day. I still do a video podcast we have at work, still put it in the feed. And to be honest with you, our video podcast at work still gets way more views from the podcast feed than it does on YouTube. So there's still value to it, I think, for sure. How about, I have on my list USB microphones. Now, I don't recall the history of my own microphone recommendations, but USB may have been up there. I started with a Snowball. Yes, I did that, you guys. It can happen. But I quickly would not recommend that. I'm not sure I even really recommended it. I'm not sure I definitely didn't start the Podcaster Studio with the Snowball. So were you guys recommending, has that changed? Has your recommendation for USB? I mean, Dave, you're on one right now, so you probably should talk about it.
Yeah, I think I used to recommend the SM58 because
still
again, it was
still will go to the SM58.
Yeah, and I think before that, I had played with some condenser microphones. So I'd use the Audio-Technica 2020. I had a AKG something.
Oh, the AT2020, that was my first. Was that the USB or the?
No, it was back then. It wasn't USB. It was.
Yeah, that was my first pro microphone. I went
Yeah.
to Guitar Center and thought, I made it, dude. I bought an
That's
AT
better than
2020.
Radio Shack.
Don't that brings a tear to my eye because all the Radio Shacks are closing, and I still need Radio Shack like twice a year. You guys, come on, you can't
You
stay
need
in
those
business with my
cables, man.
twice a year $4 purchase.
So I think that was what I was recommending. And then I forget when, for me, it was Father Roderick had a thing on his website comparing some microphone to the 2100. And I was like, man, that sounds cool. And then he said, it's both XLR and USB. And I was like, sold, and bought one. So
Daniel, have you changed on USB microphones?
I don't think so. I have changed on microphones that I recommend, but
you would have. Okay, so we have the magical ATR 2100 now, which
Yeah.
we didn't have back then. But you were still recommending a USB microphone before the ATR 2100.
no, I never recommended USB only, and I will never recommend USB only because,
Oh,
and
USB.
when I
Okay,
say
we changed it a
USB
little
only,
bit. Yeah, we changed it a little bit. I get you.
I'm saying a microphone that's the only connection style. So
Right.
even back in the beginning, what I was recommending is get a mixer, get an XLR microphone. If it can connect via USB, that's cool, an added bonus. But it'd be better to start with professional gear that's XLR connectable than something that locks you in with USB. Now today, I think if someone, the hard thing is to recommend something for someone to grow with them. And USB only microphones don't grow, because if you want to get two people, then it starts getting complicated, and all kinds of other things get complicated. But there are some podcasters who only ever want to podcast by themselves. And in such cases, maybe a USB is fine.
Yeah.
That's why when I see someone who says, oh, I bought the Yeti or whatever microphone that's USB only, if it's an okay microphone, like the Yeti is a fine microphone, a little bit overpriced, too big, and very prone to user error. But if they already have it, they don't need to replace it with an ATR 2100. They've already got a good enough microphone. And so that's more where I try to focus now is, what is it that you actually need, than saying, oh, here's this thing, this is what you take, go.
And that's the beauty of the 2100 is you can start off and it grows just like you're saying. I mean, that is, and I mean, that's just like icing on the cake because the microphone is amazing. It sounds great. Dave sounds fantastic and it does the job really well at a very affordable price. Again, that grows with you. I did finally find a weakness of the ATR 2100 in my studio, which you are kind of seeing right now. You'll see I'm on the Heil right now. I use the ATR all the time. In fact, Podcasters Roundtable was dominated by me, or for the most part, not dominant, but for the most time, I held the ATR 2100. It worked fantastic for the setup I needed. And now I'm back to the boom arm. And what I noticed, and you know that actually the Heil is specially shielded against external, like interference, right? It has a special something. I just read about it today. And the ATR is more susceptible to there's an issue in the studio where I get some kind of RF electrical, some kind of interference. The ATR picks that up like a charm. The Heil, I don't know that the Heil blocks it completely, but if what's weird is the position you see me in, I'm in the twit position right now. I've got the Heil pointed vertically up at my face, right? And this is how you see them do it on twit. And this position does shield against that issue. If I had the ATR like this, you'd be hearing a buzz in it. So that makes sense. I mean, typically professional, quote unquote, better built in terms of how their innards are. They are more susceptible to being thrown around. The SM58 is famous because you can drive a truck over it. And I literally saw my boss use it as a hammer and then we used it as a question mic. Not joking. It was amazing. The Heil is solid. So I did find that difference in the build quality. But other than that, and that is such a rare thing, and no one I've recommended it to has ever had that problem. And lifetime warranty. Daniel's already taken advantage of it. So, it's a solid microphone. But in terms of recommending, for me, it's always recommending the microphone that's best for the person. And the beauty of the ATR is you can recommend it to anyone and they can grow into it. And you don't sacrifice, I don't think that 99.5% of your audience is going to know the difference between you got an ATR and you got a Heil and your sound is better. No, it's not going to happen. Your sound might become muddier. That's what they might notice. The Heil is actually harder to work with than the ATR. The sound I get out of the HR is ready to go. I don't think the Heil is ready to go without EQ. Personal opinion.
I would agree with that. I've had some people that I've interviewed and getting their audio over Skype or it's a little compressed. And I always have to kind of go in, and I know we all want that big boomy sound, but there are times when I'm like, too much boom in the boom.
Mud. It's mud. I know some really big podcasts that use the ATR and they're using it wrong. I mean, besides I've seen people talking to the side of it. It does say front firing here at the top, and they literally has a person with their mouth at the top, but it's muddy and people mistake that as, ooh, I got the boomy radio voice. No, you have I'm behind a door mud voice, which I'm even guilty of myself of violating, but the Heil is naturally like that, in my opinion.
Yeah.
You know, when my wife and I did my 301st episode recently, I found old clips from old podcast episodes that I played during certain portions of the story. And I found the clip where I upgraded from one of those super cheap mic packs that you could get from Musician's Friend that was the mic stand, the microphone, and the XLR cable for $20. I was upgrading from that little microphone that looks like an SM58 but was super cheap to the Heil PR40. And I listened to that episode, and in that episode I was like, listen to the beautiful sound of my voice. Now looking back at that and hearing the difference from that cheap microphone to the Heil PR40, I actually like the sound on the cheap microphone better. It sounded more natural. It didn't sound so boomy, artificial. I'm the voice of God and you can't have a relationship with me, which that's a horrible theological statement I just made. Sorry about that, if you're keeping track. But so the main point is have a microphone. Once you have one, worry about other things.
Check, move on.
So let's we don't want to derail from a microphone conversation because come on, we're on fire right now. Let's go further into that. Here's one you hear everyone say: get a dynamic microphone because that condenser is way too sensitive.
Well, and they'll say condenser microphones pick up more background noise and dynamic microphones block it out.
I'm so on the fence here. This is still being worked out in my in my own world. I will concede that I think there is some that blanket statement is not wholeheartedly correct. But Daniel, what do you want to say about that?
It is, I think, one of the biggest myths in podcasting microphones is that dynamics are better than condensers. Many of us have propagated that myth, and many people simply repeat us. The truth is that microphones, just audio, doesn't work the way it seems we're often communicating when we say a dynamic is better than a condenser. What a condenser does is it picks up more frequencies in general. And I'm going to be making general statements here. Condensers pick up more frequencies than dynamic microphones do. In some situations, the frequencies that a condenser microphone picks up are the frequencies that have more noise in them, like fan noise, air conditioner noise, those really high frequency noises. So condenser microphones pick that up, but that also means condenser microphones pick up those higher frequencies from your voice. So your voice could sound a lot more clear coming through a condenser microphone than a dynamic.
Yeah, I don't think, and I don't debate that. I think that anyone knows that if you go into a professional studio, you're going to get on a condenser because it's going to be better for your voice. It picks up, it's better. It picks up more of your voice. It sounds better, but dynamics have a real world working purpose. And oh man, it's so this you can't give this advice is almost impossible to give because it is specific to. It's not specific. It's different for everybody.
Right.
Yeah, and the thing to think about is, yes, generally podcasters are working in environments where they do have that high frequency sound being created by their computers, their air conditioning systems, their room noise, anything like that. So yes, in general, dynamic microphones are still better, but it's even, I hear it right now through the Hangout. I hear your computer fan noise, Ray, and you're talking into the Heil PR40 and it's pointed away from the computer fan noise. So it's still picking up some of that noise. The other myth that kind of goes along with this condenser versus dynamic thing is background as far as distance. Like if there's a dog barking in the background or a cricket farting outside or something like that, the condenser microphone picks it up, but the dynamic microphone wouldn't. That's completely false. There is no distance difference between the two microphones. Sound works exactly the same for both of them. They pick it up a little bit differently, different methods of picking up the sound. But if the sound makes it to that spot where the microphone is, a condenser microphone will pick it up just as much as a dynamic microphone does. It doesn't filter out based on distance.
And that's one of the things that I'm most interested in here. And yes, this microphone is literally sitting over the top of a laptop that refuses to let its fans go. This is why I do not record outside of live streaming with computers on. It doesn't happen. And I always use, well, outside my AT2020, RIP, buddy, that I always used a dynamic microphone. But you can't be right next to a sound source like I am for live streaming. It will pick it up. So, you know, people think, oh, I get a noise gate and it'll go. No, it'll go away when I don't talk. But if it's there when you're talking, it's there. Okay. So the thing that I'm most interested in is that rejection, right? So does a dynamic mic reject more? I think it comes down to polar pattern mostly. Mostly. I mean, you do have large diaphragm versus small diaphragm. You do have magnets versus coil. Like there are some things in there that I think can make a microphone more sensitive. Engineers will say a condenser is more sensitive. Determining what that sensitivity is difficult so far. There has to do with how a dynamic microphone can handle a podcasting situation where you want to be closer to the microphone. Typically, it's easier on a dynamic microphone.
And sensitive doesn't mean it will pick up background more.
Yeah.
It just means what it picks up. Everything it picks up louder. It's like I'm on the Electro Voice RE320, which is more sensitive than the Heil PR40. It doesn't mean it picks up the background anymore. It just, everything it picks up is a few decibels louder than if I had my mixer on the exact same settings for the Heil PR40. So if I account for that, I can turn down my gain. I can stay the same distance away from the microphone. I get the same volume sounds. I get the same amount of background noise. It's just I have to compensate in different ways with either the preamp or my post-processing.
And then again, once again, I mentioned polar pattern, which is important, right? You've got cardioid versus hypercardioid. You'll have a condenser shotgun, which tends to be a hypercardioid, or a supercardioid, which is going to have a much narrow polar pattern versus, like the ATR has got a great rejection. If Dave took that microphone and talked into the side or the back of it, it wouldn't sound anything like talking into the front of it.
If I talk into the side of it now,
I mean,
it's a whole lot different.
There you go. And it's not like you changed his proximity to the microphone. He just moved to the side where the pickup pattern is not.
Right. Now, if I did that with a 2020, it'd be a different story.
Yeah, many condenser microphones do also have cardioid or hypercardioid patterns as well. But in general, the condenser microphones tend to have a wider polar pattern. And so that's where, yes, they can pick up more, but it's not a universal thing that you can say a condenser microphone picks up more background noise than anything else. It really is about that polar pattern.
That said, what are you guys going to recommend today in 2017 to a new podcaster? Are you going to tell them?
Yeah.
A dynamic or condenser? Let's just put that out there.
I recommend the 2100. Yeah. I mean, because
that's a dynamic, people.
Now, if Audio-Technica made a condenser version of the 2100 that had the same kind of polar pattern, the same features where it's USB and XLR, and it was the same price, had the same warranty, then we would have a really interesting discussion, and there would be all kinds of microphone comparisons between the two of them.
Would love to hear that. I mean, we scared Paul out of the room a long time ago with our microphone talk. Thanks for joining us, Paul. Paul's like, I'm out.
Well, you can make a dynamic microphone sound horrible. I actually now have a new chair, and I used to love my old one because if I was too close to my knobs over here, it would turn, and the first knob it would hit would be the gain on my preamp. And so I would all of a sudden have this huge amount of, I could be a mile away from the mic and I still had a decent level because it was really just killing the gain on that thing. And so I always sounded boomy. And then I'd look over and I'm like, oh, hold on a second. I'd have to turn it down and get closer to the mic, things like that. So you can make any microphone sound horrible, I think, if you work at it really hard. There's some good advice for you right now. Anything can sound crappy.
Stargate Pioneer says, was Firewire a big recommendation for multi-track mixers 10 years ago versus USB today? I would say it's less about a recommendation and more about availability.
Yeah.
Firewire mixers, that was the way. You know what? That's not true because I had the infamous, I just did a video about this. I had the multi-mix, Elise's multi-mix, and that was Firewire. Then Elise switched it themselves to USB 2.0. So really at the time that I've ever given recommendations, there's always kind of just been one tech available. You can still get, well, there's a couple Thunderbolt mixers that are really high end. It's generally USB 2.0. Thunderbolt is going away because Thunderbolt is going away. And the mixer manufacturers can't really they've never kept up with the tech. So like, there's still the Mackie Onyx series, which is Thunderbolt, which I would not recommend, even though it's a really cool mixer. It's got an attenuation issue, blah, blah, blah. The one I just did a video about on my YouTube channel is a USB 2.0. So, when it comes to multi-channel mixers, it's kind of what's available. I mean, most things available were Firewire. Now they're USB 2.0. So
yeah, because back in the day, Firewire was the only way you could transfer that much data from multi-channel when we had only USB 1.1.
Yep.
See, go ahead.
What about a mixer? That's one of the other things that, is it really a necessary recommendation anymore?
I hesitate to get people into mixers, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't use a mixer. My personal workflow involves preamp to recorder. I told you I don't even like I don't turn the computers on when I record. Now, obviously, this show does get recorded with a computer. We got a live stream. But no, I don't. I always ask people, make sure you ask me before you buy gear, because you can't take a blanket recommendation and apply it to your podcast. Everyone's different. So a lot of times they'll find a package and they'll buy it and it's got a mixer that's way too big. Turns out maybe they didn't even need a mixer and they spent too much money and the complexity level goes way up, right? So for me personally, it is definitely individually based, and I don't steer people towards a mixer until they absolutely need it. And then there's a question, when do you need a mixer? But what do you guys think?
So if somebody's doing interviews over Skype, you just say, get a whatever Scarlett or whatever, and don't worry about mix minus. And
maybe.
How do you do a mix minus with a Scarlett? Don't you have to have the 2i4?
Well, if you're recording in the computer,
right? You can first of all Skype recording software, right, Daniel?
Yeah, Skype recording software, or something,
Zencast
audio
or
hijack or
whatever.
something. That is recording both sides for you. And the Scarlett interface is when you connect it via USB, it can play the computer audio to you, but it's just designed that it doesn't loop it back. So if you wanted to use an external recorder, I guess you could tap into the line out, I suppose.
And that's the beauty. You go in interface, you record on Skype software, and you do a backup with an audio recorder coming out of the outputs of the whatever interface you use. Most are going to work that way, but you can even use audio recorders as interfaces. And okay, so the beautiful, the amazing, I hope I get my hands on one of these. I'm saying all these things before I even know. The Mix Pre Series Sound Devices is this crazy professional brand that all the movies use. They've come down to our level, sort of, $600 range with recorders. Now, the key here is that you can use them as an interface and record on them at the same time. This is going to change things. So that's probably a device I might start getting people into.
And that's something, that device, as well as the Podfather, the actual Podfather, Adam Curry, is coming out with his device very soon. Smallbatch.audio, if you want to check that out. These both basically, like the Adam Curry device is the same as the Mix Pre, but without a built-in recorder. So the Curry's device will be for if you want to record into your computer, and it will be cheaper. I think starting price, well, if you get in super early, I think starting price will be $500, but the Mix Pre, more expensive. However, I would think the Mix Pre is probably going to be the superior device because it's made by people who've been making high-end audio equipment. And this year, 2017, guys, I'm going to be spending too much money because, I don't know, call me stupid if you want. I'm going to buy both of these things when they come out. I mean, one, I want to buy something Adam Curry puts out. Just to show him support, show him thanks.
So do I, but the price is too much for he has a non-starter issue that he's already recognized is on purpose. with no ability, unless you can do a panning option, you cannot separate the tracks. He thinks that this is a asset because the whole purpose of this thing is to just put it on and record. But yeah, I can't spend $500 to $700 and not be able to separate my audio. I mean, it has to happen. I have to at least be able to do the pan left, right. That may happen. Otherwise, yeah, I would love to support it, but
I thought you could. I thought somewhere he said it would.
No, it doesn't separate. You can't separate channels. It's all meant to start recording and be done. I mean, that is the whole thing about this. It's got the noise gate, it's got the compression. You're going to have a radio voice. Adam is a radio guy. That's what he wants it to sound like. So I'm excited about the device. I've seen it. It's amazing. I just hope that maybe there's a way to do it or there's an update. And like Daniel, you're saying, I want to support what he's doing. I want to see him succeed. He is the podfather, right? He brought us this medium. So don't get me wrong. I think it's an excellent device. I think that this is constructive feedback on my part.
But with the Mix Pre 3 Mix and Mix Pre 6, that could eventually be what I suggest for high-end people instead of a mixer, high-end podcasters.
Yeah.
Because it's small. It has a recorder built in. I mean, yes, it's a high price, but it's replacing potentially all of these other things that you might need to buy.
However,
like a recorder, a mixer, an interface, and possibly even hardware compressor limiter gate. And it records in multi-track.
Okay. I mean, you could go preamp into it. How are you getting the gate? They don't have that in there.
Yeah, it's got a hardware compressor limiter gate built into the Mix Pre.
Really?
And you can adjust it per channel.
I didn't hear that. This gets better every time I hear about the Mix Pre. Man, I love that thing. I'm going to sell all my recorders to get this thing, by the way. Wow. So the one question that remains on this is mix minus. Now, we had last week or 2 weeks ago on here from Pod to Pod. Gosh, sorry, I'm blanking on your name.
Matthew.
I'm terrible at names. So just know that it's nothing personal. Matthew, he did a great interview with these guys, the Mix Pre sound devices, and one of the engineers there. And he did throw out the question about mix minus. And the guy said yes, but it didn't get clarified. So I don't think he understood. He understood it in that you can record Skype both ways, but mix minus can I send the person other audio minus their own? I think you might be, that remains a question for me.
My understanding is yes, because of the interface, you'll be able to virtually mix what goes to a particular USB channel.
I mean, if it does that, game over.
Yeah.
I mean, game over. They're killing. I'm so excited about this device. We should probably not continue to go down this hole, but this is the stuff that makes us excited. It's fun. So, hey, if you guys are, anyways, hopefully I'll do a review. We'll probably all be doing some type of review, but I'm excited about that one. You said, Dave, in the chat, Stargate SP had something he was interested in.
He was asking 10 years ago to host your own files or go with a media hosting service. I don't know that I've ever recommended using your own web host as a media host.
No.
And that's thanks to Hall of Fame podcaster Dan Klass, who in 2004 was doing a thing, was self-hosted, got noticed by the New York Times and had quite the large bandwidth bill. Now I realize not everybody's going to get New York Times, but I just know too many people have been asked to move.
I think, well, if someone is trying to do this for virtually free and they're between use their own web host or paint with peanut butter, as you put it, Dave,
right?
Like using archive.org or something else, what are you going to suggest? If they absolutely cannot pay for a media host.
Yeah. Okay. In that case, I would go that route.
If I have a hard time buying it. To be honest with you, I get it. Budgets are one, but you can get what, Dave, what's the lowest level you live? $5? No, that just keeps it alive.
No, $5 will get you an RSS feed and 50 megs.
50 megs. I mean, you can compress the snot out of that.
That's 100 minutes. 100 minutes, 64 mono. I think Podbean has one for $3. You know,
yeah. I mean, now we're not even talking about budgets. I mean,
yeah, we're talking about a Mountain Dew and
we're
half
talking
a
about
Starbucks.
recycling your cans at the local recycling center.
But you know, one of the potential problems is not necessarily the amount of money, but the ability to pay. Like I'm thinking of kids who don't have credit cards.
They have parents.
Yeah, they have parents, but So yeah, it's
I
like
get your
kids.
point. I get your point, though. Would you? I mean, yeah, sure, whatever. I mean, a lot of people they host on their site and they get away with it for a long time. And if
Yeah.
you get shut down or your stuff you get noticed and it break, I mean, that's what you're going to have to deal with. That's the consequence. I think know the consequences, right? I think that's the key. And if you want to go that route, you want to roll the dice. And would say a lot of people are yelling at us right now, saying you're not rolling the dice. I've been doing it forever. It's not going to matter. Fine. I mean, these things are best practices less than they are advice, in my opinion. That's how I look at it. I'm going to tell you from my experience to make your life easier. This is what I would do to have a better experience for you and the listener. These are things I would do. But
Since you mentioned hosting, how about web hosting companies? Do you feel comfortable throwing some companies under the bus?
Yes.
Who do we no longer recommend?
I tried Bluehost, and I had 2 or 3 shows on there, and all of a sudden, Ask the Podcast Coach just went. Brrr. It was like, and I went to them and said, "Hey, what's going on, guys? Because my website's taking forever to load. I can barely log in." And their answer was, "It's working fine for us." And I'm like, okay, but I have, literally they gave me 0 support, so I've moved everything off of Bluehost. I almost recommend HostGator. It used to be you could get support at HostGator 5 to 10 minutes, and now it's more like 20 to 30 minutes on their live support. I don't know. Daniel, you got anybody to throw under the bus?
Yeah, well, HostGator too. Not necessarily because of experience. And I've met some of the HostGator team and they have some cool stuff going. That's nice. But at this point, I just don't feel good recommending any EIG owned company. EIG is this mega conglomerate, I think based in China, and they own most of the popular web hosting companies you're familiar with. Bluehost, HostGator, Site5 now is owned by them. A lot of these companies, and those are the companies that also pay really big affiliate commissions, like $165 or $200 for standard, $5 a month thing. And so they're getting major promotion. They're almost overgrowing and cramming so many websites on their servers, and just the major conglomerate nature of it, I'm not really that comfortable recommending anyone in that. So I've found other companies to recommend. Like I'm liking SiteGround. I know Dave, your co-host, Jim Collison, is liking really
Maple
independent.
Grove Partners.
Maple Grove Partners. And someday EIG may try and buy one of these other places, and then I'll stop recommending them as well.
Daniel, do you watch Mr. Robot? I think you'd love it.
No.
Because it's a fantastic show built on your whole premise of web hosting and major conglomerates. But I love Mr. Robot. All right. So for me, I've changed. I mean, I was on one forever. I will say I am now on SiteGround and insanely love it. So thanks, Daniel, for that recommendation. I even kind of questioned Daniel. Even knowing the recommendation coming from Daniel is good enough, but I still want to know more. And I will say it's been an amazing move. But yeah, I mean, it's so tricky. Web hosts are like cell phone carriers. They're like banks. Like I use Bank of America, and the next person next to you hates Bank of America. Had the absolute worst experience. I use Verizon. No way, dude. Never. AT&T all the way. So that's a tough one. I think again we're in a situation where be informed, right? Don't just maybe go right after it because it's the cheapest. Ask around. Ask one of us.
Yeah, I don't know that I would recommend that anymore. The $5 self-hosting or not the shared hosting. I think I would recommend people go with a WordPress hosted now, whether it's and all those companies we just mentioned have some sort of WordPress configured. I'm not 100% sure exactly what that means. I just know it's made more to because WordPress is so hackable, and I think it's just designed to make it run faster. So to me, anything that is designed to do something better, and I've had, like I say, that when Bluehost gave me it just died. I was on a shared hosting plan. So
bringing that up, I will. One of the reasons I was looking or so happy today about SiteGround, again, being happy all the time with him, the support's amazing. First of all, they always say you're like 13th in the queue, and then they're like you're right there. They're 24 hours a day. So because of that, Dave, I mean, SiteGround does specialize in WordPress, so they understand the needs. I always felt with my other hosts, I won't throw them on the bus because they were good for a long time. It just got bad. The relationship got ugly at the end, and we
Right.
split amicably. But
I want my records back, man.
I do want my records back. But I always had this theory that because WordPress is always being attacked, right? And that was my theory. I mean, if you put a plug in, you can see how many times you're being attacked. The brute force attacks constantly. And I was getting told you need to upgrade to this more expensive account because you're using too much. And I kept for a year, we went back and forth, and I said, is this real traffic or is it spam? Because I'm seeing a lot of attacks, and I think that has a pull on the server, whatever. And they just couldn't answer my questions, and they just denied stuff, and it never felt right. So SiteGround today publishes a blog post about their new ability to thwart these attacks before they hit your login page on WordPress. And this happens to me often, brute force attacks. So it is common that 3 to 5 times a day, your WordPress site will be attacked by someone trying to basically log in, brute force into your hack your login. And this takes a toll on your server. It can create perception that you're caught, that you need more space or you need more bandwidth, CPU, because your server is going up, but it's spam. So anyways, they wrote that after a year of frustration. I was like, yes, SiteGround, thank you so much. It's still in my tab. I want to tweet it out and I'll say, this is what's going on. It's true. Oh my gosh. So they get it. So going with a host who deals with the stuff that you deal with on a daily basis, I mean, there's obviously a lot of value in that. So this isn't just a commercial for SiteGround. I'm enjoying that. You should see what your needs are and then pick your host, but don't just pick, I think I may still have an affiliate thing for Bluehost. I mean, on my website, I'm going to go take that down like immediately.
I was approached by them today. They said, hey, first they said, would you like to be an affiliate? I said, I already am. And they said, oh, great. What's your affiliate name? And I said, don't even bother. I said, I've had a really bad experience with you guys, and I don't think I'll be recommending you anymore. Because I'm sure they're going to say, well, we'll up your affiliate to, it's like, that's not really.
It's not the point.
iStock Photo, this is another changed recommendation. iStock Photo contacted me also recently, and I'm one of their affiliates, and they said, hey, we want to help you increase your affiliates. How about we do some kind of special promotion thing with you? And I responded, say, hey, your prices I don't even know the word for how much your prices have increased. It's more than 12 times what it was years ago. And credits used to expire. Now I'll give SiteGround this, or not SiteGround, iStock Photo this. Their credits, if you buy credits on iStock Photo, they no longer expire. That's nice, but credits are so much more expensive, or it takes so many more credits to buy a photo now. So that's one of those things that I can't recommend them. Other photo places that I used to recommend are gone. Like Dollar Photo Club is now Adobe stock, and that costs too much per month. At some point, these other places are going to also be taken over, and certain recommendations have to keep changing.
So congrats to us and battle. We no problem filling an hour.
No.
I did not get halfway through the list. Not surprised. I mean, that's good. I can always bring this topic back up. We'll try to blaze through a couple of these. Skeptic Smash podcast in the chat. I don't think we're even going to approach this. He says, why does everyone hate SoundCloud so much? I don't think we're going to approach it here because I don't think any of us really ever recommended SoundCloud.
Because good reasons.
Because it's just, and Mark, he's said a little bit of stuff in the chat, how they're a financial house of cards, and it just don't. Like, you can email us and we could probably give you reasons, but it's not really a recommendation. I don't think that hasn't changed. I don't think that's really changed. In the beginning, we didn't recommend, here I am going down the hole. We didn't recommend SoundCloud because it wasn't a podcast platform. It really was a pain. I mean, there were a couple of instances where I may have had put someone on it because they wanted to produce such a massive, they're like, I'm doing a 6-hour show a day and I'm not changing it. I'm like, you know what? Just go to SoundCloud because it's the only place you're going to be able to pay this crazy price you want to produce podcasts that unfortunately not many people are listening to. So yeah, but in general, no, there's too many. They're not a podcasting company, and they've shown it. They've shown it. So not to mention, they always are teetering on the brink of going out of business or being sold. They need to be sold and bought by, just buy them Google and figure it all out.
You brought something up that is almost an ethical question. Is when we are working with podcasters and we know their podcast isn't good, They're never going to have, and it's horrible. I feel horrible saying these things, but the truth is there are certain podcasts that are horrible, or that because of the niche or because of the style, for whatever reason, they will never grow beyond a certain limit. So, do you feel like we should allow a lot more fault in recommendations for those kinds of shows? Like what you're saying, like, okay, yeah, just go to SoundCloud. You're fine.
So in that case, when I was saying they literally had no option, I mean, they would probably break their website. It came down to being so specific that was their option. And I told them about what like they were informed, and they probably did fine. For me, like, it is not, this is kind of the premise of my next episode of Podcaster Studio, is that, look, I'm going to tell you how to produce a podcast. It's not for me to decide if it's good or bad. In fact, you know what? I don't care. I don't give 2 cents. And this is the premise for getting you started. Right now, you want to get started. I don't care. It's for you and your listeners to decide if it's good or not. So I'm still want to set you up for success, for the future, for the unknown, for the life. That's putting you on good hosting with good stats, so you can do things easier and more reliably. I mean, I'm not going to put you on the $20 plan when you only producing, 25 megs of content a month. Right. So for me, it is an interesting question. I mean, and it is hard at times to say, no, you know what? That's not going to do very well. And I have to stop myself, give recommendations as how they can make that better. But making that judgment it's tough not to sometimes.
Yeah. I've had a customer get pretty mad at me. She was doing, I don't know how to explain, an extreme anti-abortion show. It was all just, extreme, like massive, billions of people are dying. Just, we know the debate there.
Is this a client or
it was a coaching client I had?
Because I will dismiss myself I will say, we're just not the right fit.
And I said, well, I can help you. And then she said, great. And then I want to get sponsors. And I said, I'm going to be straight up honest with you right now. I said, there are going to be certain sponsors that I said, you have a topic that will divide people instantly on it. I said, the minute you say the word abortion, lines form. I go, and I said, I'm not here to judge or not. I said, but I'm just going to let you know, there are going to be some sponsors that will not touch that at all. And I just said, so, and she got really mad. She's
and
like,
they may not even care about your approach, your style, or anything. They just know you're in that category. We don't want to be associated with any side on that.
Yeah, they just run away. And I said, so I'm just being honest with you. If that's your goal, I said I would recommend a Patreon or something like that. I said, because people that are in your camp are going to be very passionate to make sure you keep your podcast going. She wanted sponsors. And I'm like, okay, well, just my official thing is you're going to have a hard time. I said, now feel free to prove me wrong. Feel free to prove me wrong. But
the crazier you are, the more likely someone's going to find you. And
there's another thing. Sponsors. Is that something we still recommend you try and get sponsors?
I'm trying to think if it's something I ever really recommended. It's never my first. Here's the thing where it's like, now I feel like a political candidate where I'm like, well, you can fact check me because it's possible that I've certainly talked about sponsors. I don't recommend sponsorship. For me, it's kind of the last way I would monetize. Just personally, it's not the way I would want to monetize my podcast because it's the most difficult route and oftentimes not the most lucrative for most podcasters. So no, I mean, I've certainly talked about sponsorship and ways to approach that. It's not my recommendation.
I think the thing that's changed for me is just the Glenn the Geek effect. 10 years ago, we didn't know if we were going to get any sponsors, and then there was a whole ramping up just the industry to explain what the heck a podcast was. And then everybody thought you had to have the CPM thing. And so now that I've seen Glenn, I don't know that anybody's going to, quit their day job with sponsorships, but you can definitely pay for your podcast and have a little gas money and maybe even a little vacation money if you hit it right. It's possible. Where before I was like, I don't know. Now I can say, no, there are some people. If you're doing it right, there's a shot.
Well, where I find myself with this is no longer saying, well, I'm not, again, you can or like Ray said, you can also fact check me. I know I've talked about getting sponsors, what it takes, what sponsors are looking for, that kind of thing. But now I feel so much more like, even for my own shows, Once Upon a Time, breaking news here, Once Upon a Time was just renewed for a 7th season.
Nice.
And that's a podcast. Our Once Upon a Time podcast is one that I've had sponsors before, and I've tried to get sponsors before. And Jessica Kupferman works for my network, and she can help me try and get a sponsor. But that's one that I kind of feel like, I think I just rather have it crowdfunded by our audience. It's a whole lot more fun. Our audience gets value from that. Even just in our episode we recorded last night, we did this little parody that combined a song from Frozen from another pop culture with another pop culture song, and we had some parody lyrics and put this thing together. I threw it up as a standalone download only for our Patreon members, and I mentioned it in the podcast. And I love doing that kind of thing. It's value for value and giving me an opportunity to deliver more value to those who are giving us more value too. I think that is a model that can work so much better for any podcaster. I mean, are you going to get a sponsor that pays you $2 per month? No, probably not. And it's not worth it to you. It's not worth it to the sponsor. But you might have one listener willing to pay you $2 a month. Well, that could be kind of cool. And you might not mind having only one person paying you only $2 a month because they're loyal.
And plus you get the access, then you can treat Patreon like your own little personal membership site.
Yeah.
And be having polls and all sorts of stuff that'll then give you more information to make your show better. So
yeah, Patreon is still fan supported, fan sponsorship, whatever you want to call it. I mean, if you want to consider it a sponsor, but you really do remove that. I mean, look, when you have a sponsor who's this third party, you have two audiences. You've got your sponsor and your audience. When it's Patreon, you have only your audience and you remove that third party. It's just nicer. I mean, if you have the opportunity to take sponsorship that really it does what you want it to do, there's nothing wrong with it. And sponsorship's completely fine. And it's good. It's pick what's best for your show. I think that's the thing. I think that's the thread through this round.
Well, and the thing that hasn't changed is step one, get an audience. Step two, if you want to, monetize. I still think people want to go to step two first. And
I get my sponsors before I start my show, Dave.
That's it.
I've heard that you can do that. So this show, fully sponsored before we ever started.
Gail Nelson had a sponsor before he had a podcast.
It happens. But these are these extreme examples that
exactly.
people here want to follow. But yeah, just listen to Dave. Now here we go. I've got 2, 4, 5 different things on the list. I will never say I'm out of time. That has never changed. I hate that. But I did ask you guys to come by for an hour. And if you're still waiting, live is a little different in best practice. So I do like to wrap it up a little bit here. But I'm going to go through this list. We each get to pick one that we want to approach. And we'll try not to be here for another hour. But pick your favorite. Daniel, here we go. Here's what's left on the list. Feels like a game show. Spin it, Dave. All right. Mono versus stereo, bit rate, posting schedule, length of episode, dare we new and noteworthy. So mono versus stereo, bit rate, posting schedule, length of episode, new and noteworthy.
I don't know that my advice has changed
On any of those.
Yeah. I think
I'm tempted
in coding, I know in the very, very beginning, I did say, use lame. But even today, really, there's not that much difference between lame and Fraunhofer. And even Fraunhofer license, by the way, recently expired. So it seems, if some of us interpret it correctly, it seems that Fraunhofer encoder could start appearing in free software. But that's an odd thing. So I don't think my advice has changed.
New and noteworthy advice hasn't changed?
I never really pushed for it. Yeah, I celebrated it when I get in there. And certainly it's worth celebrating if your show gets in there. I don't think it's something to push for. I
think maybe what we know about it has changed a little bit, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So let's take that approach. Apparently, I do want to talk about it. but I am curious because, people want to know. I think it is helpful. What do we know now versus what we thought we thought it was just helpful to a show. Maybe I'm even more curious about ratings and reviews. Daniel, I'll let you just take it away.
Ratings and reviews. Well, here's the thing.
Everyone said rate and review my show. It's going to help the podcast.
Yeah, it doesn't help your ranking. It doesn't help your search engine position. It may help you appear in new and noteworthy, but Look at podcasts that are in New and Noteworthy, and you'll see that many of them have no ratings and reviews. So really the most important thing is make an amazing podcast, have great looking cover art, have a great description, great title, great episode titles, and don't worry about trying to get ratings and reviews to make your podcast succeed. Ratings and reviews are still cool, and there are a lot of fun, good things you can do with them. But
you'll still hear the biggest podcast, Gimlets and stuff. They'll still say, go and give us ratings and reviews. It helps the show. There is when it comes to iTunes, and I would say when it comes to that level of podcast, there is the human element too, right? Because at Apple Podcasts, there are people. So it may be beyond use the marketing term, social proof. It may send a signal even inside of iTunes of this might be something worth featuring, right?
Yeah, and there's certainly that, because Apple ultimately has editorial control on all of those sections. Some sections, it seems to be, are completely handpicked by Apple. But if a rating and review, lots of ratings and reviews can get the attention of Apple, that's cool. But if you have a bad product to start with, Apple's not going to think of featuring it, regardless of how many ratings and reviews you have.
Well, I think a lot of people think it's algorithm based in that case, right? Like if I can game it to get all these ratings and reviews in a certain amount of time, I'm just going to pop up because the software is going to push me there. Not true. There's certain sections that run on algorithm, but we don't think that ratings and reviews affect that. Is that right?
Right. Well, right. It's tough because Apple ultimately has editorial control. So it's ratings and reviews can be a way to get your podcast attention, not necessarily get it featured.
Yeah, I always looked at it as social proof.
Yeah.
So if somebody typed in your subject and you're sitting next to somebody and they have 4 reviews and you have 37, maybe that person might click on yours instead.
But see, you don't see the number of ratings and reviews until you've actually clicked into the podcast. And very few people are going to go back and forth and say, okay, this one has 500 reviews. This one has 3. I think I'll go with the one with 500. They're not going to see that. Yes, they may at some point when they've already decided to click on the podcast, they may see, oh, this has 500 reviews. Wow, this must be a pretty good podcast. But it's not like Amazon where you can see this one's 5 stars, whereas this one's 1 star. You can't cross compare.
So what about advice? What's the advice for the call to act? Do we make this do we tell people to make this call to action to get to ask your audience for ratings and reviews?
There's a place for it, but I think that for a call to action, it's so much better to ask your audience to share your podcast.
Yeah. And that whole ratings and reviews things, there's like the movie, I think it's Casablanca, where he says, "Play it again, Sam." Well, guess what? He never said that. Everybody thinks he said that, but he never said that in the movie. I was actually just Googling this. And what he said is "Play it once, Sam, for the old time's sake. Play as time goes by." But for whatever reason, some comedian or somebody who was, doing a Humphrey Bogart imitation said that line. Everybody thinks it's in the movie. It's not. And so likewise, we've just heard, it helps the podcast if you rate and review, that we just all believe it now. And it's like, well, no, technically not. And it doesn't matter how many of us are going. Actually, it doesn't. It's folklore at this point.
And really, we're kind of wasting our capital, like on like asking your audience to do something, on doing something on a platform that is not yours, or it's like just a different platform. It's on iTunes. And yeah, I know that Apple Podcast dominates, but you're asking a lot over a long period of time that in theory could go away, or you could go away from iTunes. I mean, a lot of things could happen. I think I'd rather this goes to the question of how many calls to action we put in our podcast. We talked about that recently, so I won't go over it, but there's something there too.
While we're talking about ranking, that thing I said I was going to check earlier, I found a podcast, top podcast, This American Life. Mm-hmm. It has 3 categories in its RSS feed: society and culture, arts, and news and politics are the 3 categories in its feed. It does rank as number 1 for society. I'm sorry, number 2 in society and culture. If you switch over to arts, the second category it is not in the top 10 list. If I click on top podcasts in the arts category, This American Life is not even in there that I can see. And I'm down to number 100, and it's a top podcast. If I click over to news and politics, I think I'll see the same thing. Yeah, it is not in the top podcasts in news and politics. If I click through and see the top 100, I don't see it at all.
What's
So
the takeaway?
The takeaway is, for ranking, only the first category matters. Your additional categories, you don't even show up in ranking for additional
Do you
categories.
think that has to do with just their popularity in that category, or it's not being counted in that category? That's a tough question, right?
I think it's not being counted because a podcast like This American Life, hugely popular, but it's
So why put yourself in those other categories? Because you can be found there in search.
I guess.
Question: why? Well, no one really searches that way.
And I mean,
I think it's one of those. It's
you're
like,
right. No one does search that way.
I don't know that it
what's
would
going
hurt.
on?
So it's like,
It doesn't hurt. I don't think
Yeah.
it hurts. You could get hurt by putting yourself in the wrong primary category. It's I
Right.
mean, or maybe let's say of This American Life put themselves as their first category was art. They would still probably rank. They would dominate that category if it was their first
Yeah.
category.
And Rob Walsh has said that the category rankings, not new and noteworthy because that's not a ranking system, but the top podcast section and categories are based on new subscriptions, not lifetime subscriptions, but new subscriptions within the last couple days. And so This American Life is getting more new subscriptions than all but one of the other podcasts out there. S-Town is the top podcast in the society and culture. This American Life is number 2. But then S-Town is only in one category, so I couldn't compare that.
Yeah, that's tough. Well, pay attention to your primary category.
Yeah, and maybe potentially ignore all the others.
Awesome. Well, Dave, that leaves you. I forced Daniel into in an in. Come on, that was a good conversation.
what am I left with?
Forget all the rest of you. And Daniel, you sort of. What else did we force you into there? I made you talk about. You talked about.
Dave, what do you think about length of episodes or posting schedule?
Dave, you get length of. Those are your two, really.
I haven't really changed on that. I've always said it needs to be as long as it needs to be and not a minute more. Been pretty vocal lately about the whole, if we make it shorter, they will come kind of thing. It's like, no, so I've never really changed on that.
But Dave, what's the best day to post my show?
See, that one I've heard Rob from Libsyn say that if you're doing something that's entertainment based, it might make sense to release that on Friday. If you're doing something that's business related, it might be good to release it on Monday. I, again, to that say, just pick a day and stick with it, whatever your schedule is, because then you go from being a trusted friend to now you're part of their routine. I mean, Glenn the Geek is showering with me on Monday. Take that soundbite out. That sounds good, doesn't it?
I'm going to use that till
but that's what he told me. He goes, I start off my Monday. I used to be with him on the way to the feed store, so apparently he's listening to me earlier now. But I've had people that say, you're with me every Monday in the car, so that's kind of cool. So I think is whatever your schedule is, try to just stick to it if you can.
I have a theory about posting schedule that's mostly based on this show. Well, it's related to posting schedule. It's the how often question. Once a week, once every 2 weeks, daily, right? I don't know if advice has changed on those things, but once a week seems to have always kind of been that sweet spot for podcasts and podcast advice. Once a week is great, but this show's once every 2 weeks. And I produce some shows at work. One of them is every 2 weeks and it's very popular. And it seems to, it has a show that is very much like it that posts every week. And the numbers are kind of the same. So my theory based on this show doing every 2 weeks, I listen to a lot of podcasts in my podcatcher. And a lot of times things that if I get behind, right, like, so if every show posts every week, my podcatcher is always really full. Sometimes I think a bi-weekly, or was that bi-monthly? It gets really weird. Once every 2 weeks, a fortnight, gives the person a chance to hear every episode. I mean, it all depends on your listening habits, but I don't think we would be any bigger if we were once a week, to be honest with you. I think more of every episode gets listened to because we're once every 2 weeks. It gives people a chance to like, man, I can't keep up, right? So the shows, they've got the Audacity podcast every week. They got the school podcasting every week. You get a little break from your podcast of podcasting about podcasting with the Roundtable. So it's a complete theory. There is the theory that being once a week gets you more people because you're more regular. For me, I think maybe once every 2 weeks can get you equally the same because for more listens per each episode because people don't skip stuff because they get behind. So complete theory, but what do you guys think about once a week, daily, once a month?
For me, I think it depends on what is the goal of the podcast. I was working with a client yesterday, and she says, well, I'm going to have kind of a call to action. She goes, but really, I just want to keep my name in front of my customer. And she goes, I'm thinking about doing a 5-minute podcast. She goes, can you even do that? Like she thought they had to be, 45 minutes. I said, absolutely. You can do a 5-minute podcast. And she said, well, can I do more than one a week? I go, if your goal is to keep your name in front of people, you might want to do 2 a week or 3 a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, depending on what you want to do. And I told her, go out, record a couple episodes and see how long it takes and then pick your schedule. Because you can say I'm going to do 3 a week and then, you have a kid or, whatever, you move, something happens in your life. You got to take care of your parents, something that might change. So I think a lot of it depends on who your audience is, and then listen for things like, hey, I love your show, even if I have to fast forward through part of it. That's a clue that maybe it's a little too long. Things like that. But Danny, what are your thoughts on picking a schedule?
Same day as last week. And weekly is kind of the universal, I think, easiest for everybody, easiest for your audience, easiest for you to know, okay, this day is when I publish, this day is when I record and such. And it's consistent. But whatever the schedule is, the most important thing is to be consistent with it. So I think the easiest for an audience to understand and follow is weekly or even daily. But with the time shifted nature of podcasts, there's not as much need for an exactly consistent schedule. Yes, some people may subscribe to few enough podcasts, or they build their lives around a schedule or some ways. Like for me, I always try to listen to my podcasts about podcasting Monday morning before I get into the office and start preparing for the Audacity podcast. I want to make sure I'm not repeating stuff other people are saying the same week, or if it's big news, I want to hear what everyone else thinks too, so I can reference them or do whatever. Consistency, most important thing. Whatever the day is, whatever the schedule is, like Dave said, what makes sense for your audience, and just be consistent with it.
Podcasters used to always be obsessed with this consistency to the level of, I can't miss an episode. I'm producing this free content for no money, but I can't miss an episode. I've never been that camp because, as Dave mentioned, life does for me. I mean, it's all in how you approach it, but I'm not going to go crazy and spend, I probably have done this, I'm not going to spend the first minute apologizing for why I missed a week in the next episode. Like, people get it, right? I mean, what do you guys think about having to miss it? Guess what? You get sick and so does your family, or you get hurt. Everything happens. Life happens.
I listened to a podcast and they came on and basically said, I'm not doing a show this week. And I just wanted to give you something because I don't want you to go listen to something else. And I at the end of that, I'm like, I don't know if that's a good strategy or not, because it was
nice. The effort to try and say, hey, I'm not going to be, and they're trying to do something to their audience, but at the same time, like, is it necessary to apologize and to insert all this filler? Like, this is a good reason to have an email list.
Yeah. I mean, Daniel did a great job when Baby Noodle came along, or Noodle Baby, excuse me. I'm getting his name mixed up. And, that was awesome. But this was just kind of like, I ran out of time and I was like, But I get it. You want people to know that you didn't die.
Yeah, look at what Emily Prokop from the Story Behind podcast is doing. And she's on maternity leave from her podcast, basically, and she's pre-recorded a whole bunch of episodes. They're not the same as her other episodes, but they're still good, unique content. And she's been able to schedule them to release while she's out on baby time. And it's not her just week after week saying, hey, sorry, couldn't be here. Here's something I just threw together just so I can be in your ears for another week. No, it's still good content, but she does say, hey, if you're hearing this at the time of this release, I'm currently taking baby leave. So this isn't the normal format, but it's still good content.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great compromise on her.
And I would just say, don't freak out if you have to miss an episode. Seriously. Unless you do have one of those sponsors where it's actually going to lose your, then you have something to think about. There's another negative of
that's where it gets tricky. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, Emily, speaking of Emily in the chat, she's always with us. Thanks, Emily. You rock. But she says her old show used to rank higher in her secondary category, education, than her first, society and culture. So, who knows?
So maybe I wonder if there's like a hidden ranking that iTunes, the app, blocks out podcasts from appearing in a category. But I wonder if maybe Emily found her ranking through one of those other third-party services that checks the API. And so it gave her data that iTunes filters out. I don't know. But then again, iTunes may have changed things.
And they're going to change things. Everyone, Google changes things. Don't chase the dragon on that one. Like, don't always trying to be like, how do I work with the algorithm? Like, you've heard it. Make good stuff.
Well, that's changed. They used to be able to put keywords into your feed, and that was used by iTunes, and that doesn't work anymore. And there have been a couple of things that people have just abused, and that's why now iTunes is going along saying, please quit putting spam stuff in your author tag because we're running out of things to search.
Yeah, it used to be that your author tag was searchable, but it's not anymore. See, what I just did is I'm doing that so when people listen to this episode a couple years from now, that this episode is so totally timely. But at this recording, the author tag is still searched.
He's also trying to get you to not do it. He's trying not to get you to ruin it for the rest of us. That's what he said.
Right.
Like a couple relative or relevant words about yourself, but you know, not that you interviewed so-and-so. All right. Well, I think we can head out of here. We lost somebody in the chat because I think their show had started. So that is a clear signal. So this is what I mean. You know, I've always given that advice that it drives me crazy when I hear a podcast that is recorded and then released later. And there's like, we're running out of time. Really? You're running out of time? The radio manager is going to come and tell you to get off the air. No, you never run out of time. But I get it. What you maybe are saying is something about your audience and expectations and what they've gotten used to. But in a live stream, we've asked people to show up live. They're chatting. So I will get everyone back to their regular life. Not that you couldn't leave at any time. Feels like PodCamp. It should be the rule of, I don't forget what they used to call it, but the whole idea of PodCamp was you can check into a session and walk out and no one feels guilty about it. I don't, as a person who is walking out, because that always feels weird. And the presenter knows this exists. Like the rule of what is it called? Do you guys remember?
The rule of 2 feet.
See, I thought it was 2 feet. I couldn't get left out of my hand. You're right. Rule of 2 feet. And the presenter knows this is what happens here. People are transient in between sessions. So anyways, I don't know where we've gone. This is another sign we need to get out of here. Ray is battling. All right. Podcasters Roundtable. Thanks everybody so much. The chat rocked it tonight. Everyone did hang around for a lot. School of Ukulele. We'll have him on here soon. That's awesome. Very niche podcast. He's got a lot to say. Joe Taylor, Fiberific. We got a lot of people coming and going, but thanks everybody. And Daniel, where can we find your show?
I'm Daniel J. Lewis over at theaudacitytopodcast.com.
Very cool. Dave Jackson, thanks again, as always.
Yes, it was fun. Dave Jackson, schoolofpodcasting.com.
You think School of Ukulele started listening to School of Podcasting and then became School of Ukulele? I don't know.
Could be. Now we all have to learn how to spell ukulele.
Don't even. I can tell you right now in the chat, but all right. Hopefully that's a good shout out. So hopefully someone's going to check that out. If you play ukulele, I would imagine you want to go to see that podcast, listen to that podcast. Ooh, is that one that needs to be video? They need to teach you? Probably a good YouTube channel as well. Yeah. I don't know. All right, everybody. Podcasters Roundtable 94. We're inching our way towards a podcast diploma, which I say is at 100. I don't know what we're going to do, you guys, but we'll figure it out. We're going to wave goodbye and see you next time. That's what we're doing. See ya.